My guest today is writer-director Richard Bakewell, a veteran cinematographer who has worked with major media figures like Gordon Ramsay and Oprah, Mark Wahlberg, and on noted television docu-series Cops, Last Chance U and Cheer. Now, his new feature film, Roswell Delirium, is a response to both his own journey back from PTSD and the global response to the 2020 pandemic. Now, set in the 1980s, Roswell Delirium connects aliens, the Cold War, and historical tragedy in an intimate and moving coming-of-age drama as it turns back the clock and revisits the 1980s from the perspective of a young woman who believes that she has contacted aliens who can help cure the after effects of a nuclear disaster. Now, Roswell Delirium brings the elements of aliens, UFOs, Area 51, nuclear war together for a suspense drama that the audience will live along with the characters. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome writer-director Richard Bakewell and his full-length feature film, Roswell Delirium, to the show. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Man, yeah. How in the world did you get into filmmaking?
Oh, well, I've always wanted to make movies since I was like 5 years old. I tell everybody, they're like, why did you want to make movies? I'm like, well, obviously Star Wars started the whole transformation. And then as it kind of grew, it was like E.T. and Empire Strikes Back. And it was like, I just really wanted to make movies. I didn't know how. I was kind of the weird kid. And my dad called me a couch potato. And he's like, you watch too much TV. And I'm like, well, I didn't realize at the time, but I was like learning about the craft and what I really wanted to do. And I remember when I was like 5 or 6, I asked my uncle for $5,000. And he's like, why do you want $5,000? And I'm like, well, I want to make my own version of Grease so I can be Danny Zuko. And there's a girl that I like. And he goes, enough talking. Here's $2, go away. So, that's kind of where it started. And then it is kind of like it kept going through, my teen years. I mean, it just really solidified, when you start seeing films like Alien and Predator and all these other movies that just really this impacted me. And it's like, this is the kind of path that I want to go on. I don't know how, but I luckily found a film school in Chicago that was pretty, on point, called Columbia College Chicago. And they trained me a lot of stuff, that helped me really just kind of get where I am at today.
I love the films that you mentioned because back in the day, there was no such thing as CGI. Uh,
Nope.
Everybody was extremely creative. I mean, think about Predator. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of people still don't know how that was done. And to me, today's CGI, there is some of it is good, but a lot of it you're sitting there going, oh, that's CGI. And it becomes a disappointment, to the moviegoer. But in the old way of filming, especially with Star Wars, when all of the spaceships were models, man,
Yep.
George Lucas had the eye.
You really did. I mean, it's like I at least I respect like John Favreau, who is doing the Mandalorian, and he's kind of like recreating the miniatures again. It's like because people can tell when something's not real, and that's why I think people don't like movies that much these days because everything is so fake. And when the audience, knows that something's not real, they're taken out of the movie. Even if for a second, you have to keep them in there every second of the way. And it's like that's why I respect people like Favreau and Chris Nolan because everything is practical, and it's like that's how you maintain your audience to stay in the film no matter what. And like, there's too much lazy CGI these days. I always say, if you can't do it practically, you shouldn't do it at all. Like, car explosion's not gonna like save your movie. It's like really not gonna drive the story home. Like, there's all these things that are just terrible. It's like you really should focus on the story and not this like bad special effects.
Yeah, I look back at a lot of the films, especially even the silent era, like with Charlie Chaplin. If
Yep.
you look back on how the camera work was done and how they would build a partial set, but then they would build, a lot of people don't realize that they actually painted on a plate of glass to create the element of depth back in the
Right.
day. So when you watch the film, you think everything you see is real, but only half of it is.
Right. Or even like, if you look at like Star Wars or Empire Strikes Back, a lot of those are painting mats in the background. So, which is kind of like the old school of television where they'd have like the city landscape and, at the back of Bob Newhart's apartment, but it's all just, translucent. So that's kind of like the way to trick people, but nowadays they don't do that. They think, oh, well, just green screen and the CGI everything. But I think there's something to be said about the old way of filmmaking. It worked for a reason.
No, that's true. Now, where did you get the inspiration to write Roswell Delirium?
Oh, it's funny. There's like a lot of places this movie came from. I did this documentary years ago called Before I Die. It's about kids with cancer doing their bucket list. And there's one kid in particular who had cancer like 9 times. His name was Justin. And the ninth time, he just couldn't beat it. He collapsed when him and his mother, Lori, were on a trip to like do another thing on his bucket list. And, she told him, if you want to go, you can go. And I thought that was just so powerful because, she didn't want that, but she was giving him the strength to say, look, I can be okay without you. And that really inspired kind of like the dynamic of the mother and daughter story. And for me, like when you're writing something, you have to take a lot of your own personal trauma from your own life. And, I just kind of started to dive way deep into my own history, childhood, and a lot of situations where there was a time where I dated someone who was bipolar schizophrenic, and I kind of saw a few mental breaks, and it was very scary, and didn't know how to deal with it. And it kind of like it's something that doesn't like leave your mind ever. You always kind of think about that person and wonder how they're doing. You still care about them, and I had to like go to several psych wards, to see her at times when we were together, and I just kind of took all of my experiences and didn't realize where I was pulling from until later, that I was really just kind of recreating a life that I have sort of lived already. So,
Wow, it's kind of like acting in particular scenes, and you probably have seen this when you were directing, to where the actor has to pull a moment from their past to get that same idea of emotion to do a scene. And I guess
oh, yeah.
writing a screenplay is the same way.
It really is. I mean, I don't know how every writer writes, but for me, I like to make it very personal. And even at times, I'll be writing something, and if I really am into it, like an actor, I'll start to get teary eyed, and I'll start crying through the writing. It's really a weird process. That doesn't happen all the time, but it's really this. I think when I find something personal that I connect to, I think it makes it more believable, and I really start to envision it more, and it really comes out. And it's funny you mentioned, the actor having to pull from a certain memory because uh, one of the last scenes in the movie, Ashton, who plays the older version of Firefly, has to see her mother again. And I kept those two separate the entire day for a reason. So they'll be fresh when they first saw each other, it'd be very raw and natural. And, Ashton pulled a lot from her own past. And the minute she saw her mom walk into the room in the movie, like she just lost it. And she told me later that there was a point where her hands went numb. She couldn't even feel her fingers because she was so in that scene. It was just incredible.
Yeah, I remember. I know that scene. It's a powerful scene, and you have all three actresses part of that scene. But I've got to ask you first because we're going to get to that scene here shortly. But how
Sure.
daunting was it for you to write, direct, and edit your own feature film?
Oh, well, the writing part was great because I really wrote it as a short in 2018, 2019, and then just kept working on it. And then 2020, it just didn't happen because of the world stopping. So I just kind of like flushed it out for a while, and that was easy. And and then once we cast a lot of the people, like, we already had Kylie and Ari cast. They were always going to be the main two, and that helped me have a voice, and I could have a face for the characters when I was writing. So the writing part wasn't as difficult. I did like 17 drafts with it. The directing part, it I thought it was going to be a lot more difficult because there's this balance of all these 80s stars, there's all these newcomers, and there's a lot of teenage actors. And I was pretty impressed with how they were all so confident. They knew their lines, they knew everybody else's lines, and I really never had to like get in the way too much. I kind of let them have their idea of the character, and I would just kind of steer them a little bit. I would kind of keep them on the same tone. I'm like, well, now you're kind of going off tone. It's getting a little, campy. But for most of the time, the directing was just pretty much staying the course, like driving the ship and keeping us on that same path. And the editing was not part of the plan. I really did not expect to edit the film. However, I hired two editors, one at a time, and I just really was unhappy with what they were delivering for the cuts. Like I kept telling them, there's performances in there that you're not finding, and they're like, it's not there. And I'm like, I was in the room, and when I'm directing, I don't sit there and look at the monitor for 4 hours. I am right by the DP, and I look at the shot, I approve it, and then I just listen and I watch the actors. Like I sit there on my knees and watch them and give them adjustments when I feel like it's appropriate. And I just felt like you're never going to deliver the movie that I want, so I have to do it myself. And I went ahead and spent some time and cut the movie, and I think everyone's pretty happy with it. I am. So
Well, that's really all that matters.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
I love that the time period was set in the late 80s. I mean, you cast definitely a throwback to those 1980s with Anthony Michael Hall. You had Lisa Whelchel. You had Dee Wallace.
yep.
And even Reginald Vell Johnson is in the movie. How did you get these people together? And I guess you wanted to keep even that type of cast solid in or from the 80s.
Yeah, when I wrote the film, it wasn't an 80s movie yet. So I really I think after draft 8, it became an 80s movie. I'm like, I've always wanted to do an 80s movie and I don't know how. And I'm like, well, now I have my chance, and I just really took a dive into all the movies from the 80s that I loved, like The Karate Kid and Close Encounters, in terms of endearment, you name it. And my thought was, okay, now I have this movie that's set in the 80s. I needed to feel like an 80s movie. So, I always said Lisa, that she plays a school teacher in the movie. It's like when I was a kid, a school teacher was like a crucial point of a child's existence. They were like a role model. They were kind of like the source of information. And I'm like, I just really needed someone familiar to play the teacher so that when the people see her, it's like, oh, I feel like I'm back in the 80s again. And that was the kind of like the point was, I want you to feel like you're watching an 80s movie, even though it's not, but I want you to have that feeling, to feel the nostalgia again and kind of be reminded and have the dialogue the same. And getting all, like, we had, 5 people from the 80s. So like getting all them attached was not an easy process. When you're an independent filmmaker and no one really knows who you are, you have to kind of play the Hollywood game of smoke and mirrors and tell people that you have people attached, even when you don't, and I played that game for a while, and we got, Sam Jones first from Flash Gordon, and that helped us get Dee Wallace because they knew each other. And I felt like, okay, now we have some credibility with Dee because she's a fantastic actress. Always idolized her. And then we got Lisa. And then, Lisa's manager has Reggie Vell Johnson. So they kind of like got them almost together. And then the last piece was Michael Hall, who wasn't completely sold on the idea because it's sci-fi and I think it scares people. But then he watched Ashton's performance, who plays the older version of Firefly, and it was going to be the girl he was going to have the scenes with. And then he was like, I think I want to do this movie because it's going to be great. So that helped him say yes. So,
It's so funny when you tell people Anthony Michael Hall, and the first thing they think of is Breakfast Club.
yes.
And then they still think that he's a teenager. And
We do. Yeah.
yeah, and then you find out, was it 30, 40 years later, he's an adult. And what was it like working with those 80s actors? Because, to me, Reginald, I mean, I look at more of him coming from Die Hard than I do television sitcom.
Yeah, I don't really I didn't watch Family Matters too much. Urkel was funny and whatever, but Die Hard is like my favorite action Christmas movie ever of all time. It's a perfect movie. And he was like one of my main choices for the movie. And the character that I wrote, he really was this kind of villainous person, very evil, almost like a German type informant agent person. But with Reggie, he's so likable that he can't play that evil person at all. So I had to make his character a little more like Reggie, likable and friendly. And, he was like just such a giving guy, and everybody was just like smiling on set. They were so happy when he was there. And I mean, like Kylie and him only met the day that we filmed. And, we did like 2 rehearsal takes, and to see like Kylie go toe to toe with Reggie, who's been around for 40 years. I mean, she just holds her ground, and they're so good together, and they have great chemistry. And I thought, wow, this movie might work, and there was a lot of great moments in the movie like that with all these other actors, and, Sam playing Mr. Leonard, this kind of like this interrogation type guy. And I mean, everybody, Dee Wallace was another, like that was probably my favorite day on set because, as a director, I try to tell the actors or actresses that, look, we're going to be on the close up now. Here's where we're going to go in, and we're going to get your coverage. So now you can start to, give a little more. And she goes, I don't care where the camera's at. Don't tell me. And I was like, there's some cuss words that she said at me, but I was like, it's kind of funny to Dee Wallace. It's not like a mean way. She's just kidding. And what I realized with Dee is that she gives the same performance no matter where the camera is. Even when the camera's on her grandson or Ari, who is the waitress in the restaurant, she's giving that same performance. There's tears coming out of her. It's like, I've never seen an actress work that hard in my life. I mean, it was incredible to watch.
I remember Dee her performance because they're sitting in the restaurant, and of course there's another scene in the desert, but Reginald's his interaction with Kylie was hilarious because, like you said, he's got you had him with that. It's kind of like him playing that German villain in Indiana Jones,
Yes,
but. Reginald is not going to pull off the bad villain. But what was so funny about his character is that he would laugh at Kylie as a government agent.
yeah,
And it's almost like the whole time his tone was like, kid, you have no clue what we do. And
yep.
that's what I found so funny because I'm like, you know what? There's a whole lot of truth to his character.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, you think about the people that really do those types of jobs. I mean, they're probably a little more serious, but like with him, it just worked. It felt like very authentic, and that's like one of my favorite scenes in the movie. I mean, it like when I did the first edit, like I think it was like a 4-minute cut, and I was like, I don't really need to change much. Like I don't know what I could even change, and I think the only thing I've ever really adjusted after the first cut was when to put in the insert shots and then some of the sound effects. But like I really like those two played it so well. Like we shot that in 5 hours and we were done. It was so fast. I mean, we got everything. It was like, that was the most flawless scene we filmed out of all those. Yeah.
Well, Kylie, I was impressed because the whole script portion for what she had to say and to connect all of the ham radios and the signals and all together, I'm looking at her going, how did she memorize all of that?
Yeah. I cast Kylie in a movie 5 years ago called The Rabbit Hole. It's a little short film. And she was like 8 years old and so cute and adorable and bubbly. And I thought, wow, this girl's got like the screen presence. I can tell. And, she had something. I get to see it, like she hadn't done very much. And so after we did that movie, I told her, I said, I have something else for you. And, I really spent a little time with her and her mom and got to kind of see how she was as a teenager. And I really kind of crafted that character for her. And I told her, I said, there really hasn't been a lead teenage role since like, Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone or Anna Klumsky in My Girl. I said, they don't
Or
do
Michael J. Fox.
Right. Yeah, they don't do that anymore. It's like it's always a adult playing a teenager. And, it's like I wrote it knowing what she could do. I never really had to like work with her too hard on anything. It's like I put her through a lot of stuff. I mean, I put her up, 20 feet in the air on wires, and get bald cap. I mean, all these scenes, a hot garage to do these radio conversations with, and some pretty emotional stuff too. and I never got a complaint out of her. It's like she never complained. She was always focused. She is a workhorse, and it's like she's won like 4 awards so far for her role, and I'm like, there's going to be a lot more to come because people are acknowledging the fact that you are carrying the movie. Like, sure, there's all these people supporting you, but you are the center of the movie, and I think that's why people are responding so well to it because like you're letting a child actor really like take you on this journey, and there's not many actors out there, actresses who can do that at that age. So
Well, you cast three unknown actresses for the female lead, which you had Kylie Levine, you had
yeah,
Ashton Selecki, and Ariel Bodenhausen, which I thought did an amazing job playing Wendy. I mean, her
yeah.
performance alone was stellar. But why relative unknowns?
Well, I think at the time when I wrote it, like we really didn't have a set budget, so it was like, well, here's what we can start to do. And, I just felt like, there was a lot of people who wanted to play Ari's role, to play Wendy. Like I started getting a lot of people who I would pitch to. They're like, I like this role, but I'd rather play the mother. And I didn't feel that it was appropriate to uncast somebody who I promised a role to. I was like, I could never live with myself. I just couldn't do that. So I was like, well, maybe we put someone in the role of Ashton's character in the old, they have a known person play Firefly as an adult. But then Ashton came in, and then like on the callback, like everybody was in near tears. The room was silent. I had glossy eyes, and it was like I didn't have her do it a second time because it was perfect. And I'm like, I don't think anybody can ever do that scene that well again. Like it was like I could see the moment happening on screen. It was so powerful, and she really connected to it. And uh, but I thought, well, okay, now Ashton's kind of ruined my idea of casting somebody known for this role. So I'm going to then try to get somebody else. That's why we got Anthony Michael Hall, So that was kind of like where we just instead of getting somebody not known for the therapist, we got Michael Hall to be the therapist and kept the three unknowns. And, I tell you, like, there was a day where we filmed in the hospital with Ari, and, it's like, Kylie got to have the easy way in we filmed, in the classroom first, 2 days there, and then we went to the hospital sets. And, Ari had to deliver this amazing performance on day 2. And it was like we did the first take after lunch. And it was so powerful that like she I think was stuck in the moment, and like everybody was in tears crying, including myself. And the audio was so good that I decided to keep that audio and then cut around the wide shots and then stick in the close-ups but keep in that same audio because it was just like it just broke your heart. I mean, I've never seen an actress go through that and just deliver that strongly. I mean, it was like that was the hardest day on set, but like I know when I picked her, I was like, she's the best person for Wendy's.
Was that the office scene with Anthony Michael Hall?
No, the scene in the hospital where she's talking to Kylie, and then Kylie is, on the bed, and you know, and her moments of, like, if you want to go, you can go. So like that was the scene. I thought that was just like that was probably the hardest day, but like it was like you don't really have magic that often when you're making a movie, and that was a day where it's just pure magic. Like everything we got, it felt like this is going to be a great movie.
Well, I've got to ask you because one of the things that I noticed in the film, I don't know who you chose as a makeup artist, but oh my gosh, they know how to do makeup. I'm talking about the scars, the injuries. They were so authentic. And for an independent film, I found that to be amazing.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. I found this makeup artist named Rebecca Vandervoort, who lives like a mile away from me, as funny as it is. And I wanted to use her. And then there was a funny time where we were going to start in July of 2022, and she couldn't do it. And I said, hey, we're going to actually push a month. Are you that you have any flexibility? Because I don't think anybody else can do these burns and scars and the way that you can. And she goes, actually, I had something cancel. I'm like, let's have lunch tomorrow because I want you to do this movie. And she and her assistant Gabby just did an incredible job. I like they came and we did some tests, and I was just floored with what they did, even just with like a test day with Kylie and Ari with the burns. And then like there were days on set where Kylie comes back from space rock and she's covered in burns on her hands and her face, and it was like everybody was like just like jaw to the floor. They were like, "Oh my god!" I couldn't believe it. And we had to transform Ari too into an older version for the final piece of the movie. And I think her and Gabby spent 8 hours on Ari to make her age that much. And it's like Rebecca is just phenomenal, and I'm surprised that like Rick Baker hasn't like tried to like bring her to his movies or someone else because she's that good. And I think this is going to get her a lot of work. And I told her, so hopefully you still will allow me to hire you on something in my lower rates, not these Hollywood studio rates. But I mean, she just did such an incredible job, and it's like without that aspect, a lot of those things wouldn't have worked. I would have had to pull them out of the script, and we wouldn't have shot them. I'd have had to have thought of something else. But like she helped me deliver the vision and better than I ever thought.
Well, yeah, because with the character Wendy, you had to have her as a younger uh, mother, and then during that scene, the transition was so natural that I
Hmm.
actually had to look at that scene where in all three here where you had them, like you said, you kept them apart for the day until that one scene.
Yep.
But the transition of Wendy aging was so natural that I actually had to sit there and look at her and I go, "Oh my gosh." You almost could not tell that she was made up, but it hit me because I'm like, wait a minute, because Mayday's older, the mother has to be older,
Yep.
but it looks so natural. So you got a stellar makeup artist
Yeah.
because it looked real.
Thank you. It looked. I mean, it looked pretty spectacular because we filmed at a jail out in Lancaster for the final scene and some other smaller scenes that day. And I never had a chance to fully see Ari in the full makeup because we were still filming. And then, like, right before we were about to film the scene with Ashton and her, I went to the other side of the jail to see how she was looking. And I was like, wow, I didn't expect that at all. And it's funny, when we had the premiere in December, people watched the movie, and afterwards they had no idea that this girl in the dress was Ari, like, I mean, and played that role because they looked so different. I mean, Rebecca just did such an incredible job aging her without making it feel too much. Sometimes you watch movies and it's like it's too much makeup, their cheeks are too puffy, but they did just the right amount.
Well, and the lighting that you used in that scene too played a huge role in that. So, but still, it was so natural. But there was something else I also noticed in this film. You planted a lot of 1980s elements into this movie, which gave it that true, authentic feel of the time period. But where in the world did you find the things like the toys, the TV, all the ham radio equipment? I mean, it's vintage 80s.
Is very vintage. And I tell everybody, it's like I luckily had a great production designer with Molly Thomas who found a lot of that stuff. She like the bedroom for Kylie was basically a guest house that she just kind of wallpapered and took all those pictures and knickknacks from all these prop houses. And she found a lot of those toys and radios, everything. And it was not an easy ask. I mean, there's a lot of things that had to be authentic. And I told her when we met, I said, look, people's idea of the 80s is very, it's kind of like diffused and discolored because people think the walls are very bright and pink and poppy and bubblegum, but I'm like, it's not that at all. When I grew up in the 80s, it was very like brown walls, middle class. Like, you didn't have a lot of flashy stuff going on. I think the biggest thing you had was a car phone. That was like your big flash. So I said we have to kind of keep it to that world. and she found everything and just did an amazing job. And sadly, like a lot of stuff we had to buy, because you can't just buy a ham, you can't rent a ham radio, you have to buy them. They don't rent those things out. So it's like after we were done with the movie, my downstairs was a complete like prop house full of ham radios and toys that we had to keep. And but like she just did an amazing job. And I told somebody recently, like the classroom in the movie was also a set. And I told her, I said, I'm worried about this looking real. And her and her team came in and just dressed it to the T. And we were filming at one point with Lisa, and I was like, it looks like a real classroom. And she just made everything feel authentic. And it's like, she is a few years into the game, but I mean, she just has such an eye for everything. It's just incredible.
You have two characters in this film, which I laughed. I thought it was so funny. Was the two mean girls in the school, but the dialogue with the two mean girls and Kylie is hilarious.
Yeah, I tell you, the three of them together, I wish I had more scenes with. Like we filmed like the bus stop scene almost towards the end of our first part of the production. And, we were kind of running into budget concerns for the last week of filming that we had. And I watched that scene that we cut over and over again, and they were so good together. Like they had like such a chemistry. Like Georgia plays off of Caden, trying to be as mean as she is, but she's really not. She's just trying to be like her, and there's a lot of kids like that in school growing up. And Kylie has to get kind of bullied. And I was like gonna cut a scene out of the movie and not shoot it because of the budgets, but then I'm like, well, they're so good together, I have to rewrite the scene to make it fit later in the story. So I did. And that's the scene where they get off the bus and start talking about the Jordache jeans and everything. And they're so good together. And when I remember when they both came into audition, Georgia came in to be a mean girl, and I was like, she's too sweet. Like the girl is so sweet and polite. I just don't see her as being, the Becky, the really mean girl. But I was like, I want you to be the best friend. I want you to be her, because I feel like you have that persona, and you're so talented. And like when she like talks, like you just like look at her and you focus on her. She has that screen presence. A lot of kids don't. And then Caden came in to audition and just like killed it. Like I'm like, there's no one else who can play Becky at all. And then she goes to me at the end. She goes, you know what? I heard you're incredible to work with, and I'll see you in my trailer. Goodbye. And she walked out of the room. I'm like, who is this kid? I mean, so funny and so, just with it. And like them together, it's like, those are some of my favorite scenes. And I wish I almost had an entire movie of just the child actors together, because they're so good.
Oh, well, yeah, especially the picnic table scene. That is just hilarious.
Oh yeah, and it's like when I write something like that, it's like I really kind of like dove back into my own, teenage years, and remember, some of the kids talking about some of the cheerleader girls who were always vomiting in the bathroom, and making fun of them. And so I try to incorporate that, but they're just so good together. And it's kind of like, Kylie and Caden are dueling back and forth, they're going back and forth at each other. And then at the point where Kylie thinks that she has the edge, Caden comes in and just makes this crushing statement
Mm.
about her dad, and it's like, guess what? I still win. Goodbye. But they're just, it's just like such a great scene.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because was it difficult for you to show the clip of the Challenger?
It really, it was a day, like that was day two for us. And, I really had to go through the ringer at NASA to even get approval to use that footage. It took like 6 months. And I was like, well, I have to have it in there now, because they finally said yes. Um, and when I was a kid, that happened. And I remember in the classroom, our teacher crying. And at first when it happened, we weren't sure that it exploded. We didn't know what really happened. We just thought, oh, it's smoking, whatever. We didn't know. We were 7 whatever years old, whatever, and we had no idea. So when we did that scene, I made all the actors watch a video of Christy McAuliffe, and I said, I want you to see who this person was. She was a teacher, and I want you to know just something about her before you watch the Challenger, because a lot of them did their homework and saw it explode. Some of them didn't even know it exploded. And like when I was talking about her, I got so emotional. I don't know, it just like hit me all of a sudden. I was like, wow, I started crying, and I was like, I had to walk away. And then when they watched it, like we filmed it and just got like their natural reactions, and and Caden started tearing up and crying. It was powerful. It's like, wow, it was like, in the movie, it's a very integral part because this bad things happen to Kylie's father, but I was like, wow, this is still very fresh. This is almost 40 years ago, and it still got to me. And but I felt like to really tell the story of the 80s, you have to have those kind of moments in the film, like that kind of keep it on the course, so people feel like, oh, this did happen in the 80s, and or maybe something else will happen differently. But I really felt that was like a moment that everybody remembers. Like, you remember when Kennedy got shot. Remember when the Challenger exploded. You remember like when they land on the moon. All these things in the world, and the '60s or the '80s. You remember these things, and I was like, that has to be something that we put in there no matter what. So it was like a very powerful day, and it was like I said, I had to keep it together, but I had to walk away because like the tears were just so fresh. It was insane.
Yeah, it's amazing that 40 years later, it doesn't even seem that long.
No.
I still remember when the other shuttle exploded on reentry,
Yep.
and that only happened maybe 100 miles from here. They were still
Yeah.
finding shrapnel for hundreds of miles. But I've got
Oh
to
yeah.
ask you something, because the film itself is very mysterious as a sci-fi thriller. Um, Very much like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But I saw some minor Kubrick movement with the characters like you would find in The Shining.
Yep.
Um, did you study some Kubrick before you did this film?
No, I've always been a fan of Kubrick. Like it's funny when people watch The Shining and they will say, "Oh, well, there's things in there that are different," and then other scenes, they're not in the same place or they're moved. And he always said that was on purpose, And sometimes things happen that way because of continuity, But you can always say it was on purpose or what. But there were things that I really wanted to demonstrate and show that, okay, well, maybe this person isn't there after all. And so as we're moving, we see them, and then as the camera comes back, they're gone. And maybe like this person was gone because the character no longer needs them anymore, in their mind. So I really just wanted to do things where the camera tells you that things are happening, even though you may not pay attention. You may just think, oh, they might have gotten up out of their chair, but that's just too fast to happen. So it's a practical in-camera movement. It was pretty hard to pull off. And there's a lot of things like that in the film that I just really wanted to kind of like give to the audience. There's a lot of heavy things that happen in the film with Kylie, and there's things happening with the father at home that aren't really addressed until the end, but there are hints along the way. So you're kind of like giving these moments. You're like, why is she laying in bed upset and crying? And the ballerina, what is all this representing? And then at the end, it kind of tells you the full picture of it all. But it's like there are hints all along the way.
Well, I'm going to ask you because you bring something up. Remember at the breakfast table with Kylie and then her father? I should say
Yep.
Mayday
Yep.
and her father. With the shot of the father, you shot it from a downward position where Kylie, it's almost, I guess it's filmed where as if he's looking at her from his position. Is that why you did that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, I was just curious because I noticed that I was like, because I know camera angle when it comes to close-ups, it's part of the story. It tells the story. But I got to ask you something because Because of the flashbacks in the movie, did it make the editing process a hair pulling situation for you?
I mean, let me tell you, like I was talking about it last night because I had a conversation with Ashton. We're talking about the movie and stuff, and I was talking about the flashbacks, and I said, editing. Here's the thing about editing. When it works, it's fantastic. When you have a movie and all the pieces connect, it's fantastic. What usually happens with a movie is you have the movie and all these different folders and files, and then you have to find a way to connect all these pieces together when you don't have all the pieces. Like you are always missing pieces of the puzzle, and as an editor you have to bring them all together somehow and make it work. And like, I mean, we did like 5 days of inserts on this movie just with the ham radios and other things in the desert just to make pieces work. And it like the flashbacks were very difficult, not as hard as I would think, but it was. I think the hardest part for me was interweaving A to B to C. With like space rock, going from the time of older Firefly to younger Mayday. I felt like there was a lot that we had to get to connect the pieces. And even when I thought I had it, I would sit there and get mad. I'm like, no, we need something else. So then we sent this guy out to Shiprock, New Mexico, to film more shots of the giant volcano mountain. So there was always pieces that I needed, and I even when I watch it now, I'm like, oh, if I just had that one more shot, I could have done this. But like, you just have to at one point say it's enough, and it is a daunting challenge. And when I finally showed the movie, only one person or two had seen the film in its entirety. And that was the sound engineer and then the composer Troy Van Leeuwen from the Queens of the Stone Age. Those are the only two people who saw the movie in its entirety until like the audience did. So it was like, well, we're going to see how it really delivers and how they respond to it because no one else has seen this thing yet. So.
Well, what do you think about all of the current talk about aliens and UFO in the mainstream media now?
Well, I've always been a believer. I mean, we have to be pretty naive to think there's nothing else out there. I mean, there's all these other galaxies that we can't even get to. They're so far away. There's, black holes, wormholes. I feel like, aliens have probably been here before. I don't know what has happened, but I feel like because of who we are and then we're such a violent, country and world and always trying to, threaten nuclear holocaust. I feel like if the aliens had come here, I feel like they probably had wiped our minds from ever knowing it. I mean, I feel like if people found out there were aliens running around in this world and they could come here and get to us, people would be lined up at every gun shop in the world like they did during the pandemic. And they would be like arming themselves left and right. You'd have to declare martial law on the streets. I mean, I think people would get out of control. But I feel like they're out there, and I think it's only a matter of time before one day there will be a reveal. I mean, I feel like there's more to life than just humans and animals. There's got to be a whole lot more out there.
Well, for you, it seems like free publicity for the film too.
Oh yeah, and there's encounters all the time, and airplane pilots, talking about stuff, and even in the movie, I wrote some of the stuff based on some of the conversations, about encounters of other beings up in space or on an airplane, seeing certain lights and everything. There's a lot of real stuff in there, and I feel like these close encounters happen more than we think and hear about.
Yeah, it's like if you even get near Area 51, I mean, the signage is pretty stout. I mean, you will be shot without warning. So my deal is what's so important behind that chain link fence that you're going to kill people on the spot if they even touch that fence?
Yeah, and it's funny, even during my research, I read a lot of stuff where people were trying to report on their findings who worked there. And then when they started to like leak photos or stories, they were never seen again. They were just taken care of and put out into the desert somewhere, never to be found again. So I feel like there's probably something very critical there, and they're just never going to show us. It's like we're never going to know who shot JFK. They're never going to tell us these things. We're never going to get to see what's down in the bowels of Area 51. They're just never going to show us that. But
Yeah, I remember the two stories from last year. One flew a Cessna on the outer perimeter, just outside to where you're allowed to fly, and
mm-hmm.
flew all the way around it taking pictures. Another guy picks a mountain range so far away, but he's using an extremely high powered lens to
Yep.
take photos, which I think probably surprised them when they ended up in the paper.
Yeah. But they want to keep that very hidden, very secretive, and they will do everything they have to make sure that it happens. So, I mean, you might have got some exteriors, but like if anybody can ever get an interior shot that's authentic, I mean, my God, that's gonna be worth millions of dollars.
Yeah, and that person will be buried in the desert and the shovel thrown away.
Exactly, 6 feet under for sure.
Well, for you, how was it? What was it like collaborating and working with Troy Van Leeuwen from Queens of the Stone Age?
Like that was truly. I was actually, of all the actors that I worked with, I was never nervous, but I was worried about Troy. I was kind of like nervous about that because I'm like, well, here's this rock and roll guitarist from the Queens of the Stone Age. How are we gonna do together? How is he gonna see the vision that I have? And like him and I met with my producer Glenn, who set the whole thing up at the smokehouse in Burbank, and we just talked and had went through some ideas, and then I sent him like temporary tracks of like, here's what I think would be perfect for these scenes, and it was like I sent him stuff from like E.T., Close Encounters, Chernobyl, Inception, all these great movies with great soundtracks, and he's like, wow, this is a pretty big undertaking. And the first scene that he scored as a test was the scene where Kylie and Ashton come together in the desert, and it was like, wow, this is beautiful. Like, it's like you don't need any sound design here. You just need this song to play. And then I was sold. And then, him and I were working only like virtually, never together in the studio because he was on tour the entire time. He would be like in Germany and all these other countries, touring with the band and then writing music when he wasn't on stage. So he would send me stuff like scene by scene, and I'd give him my notes, and it wasn't be that many. And then it's just like it all came together. Like there was only a couple of things that I felt weren't working, and he just made it these fast adjustments. And I mean, people, when I showed them the opening sequence, they're like, wow, I got goosebumps. Like they just really felt the music, and it just kind of drove the story. And it's like a beautiful score. And I told him, I said, we have to eventually get the soundtrack released on cassette, somewhere, CDs, wherever, vinyl, because it's pretty good. It's up there with the other soundtracks of today. I mean, it's really a fantastic job, and he's won a couple of awards so far for his score, and I can't wait to see when the world gets to finally see it, and to hear his music. It's just so powerful.
Well, in the theme of the 1980s, I guess you would have to release a cassette.
Well, I thought about doing that because they're releasing VHS tapes now for movies as kind of like buy like 100, 1,000 copies, as a gimmick. And I'm like, well, we could, probably do like a dual-sided cassette tape like the old days, pretty cheap, and release those out there. People buy vinyl all the time, and people still buy, CDs wherever you can find them. But I'm like, a cassette tape would be like a collector's edition, So I think that would be something we might want to do down the road.
Well, if you ever decide to do a DVD, maybe you should do a VHS because that would be perfect advertisement for this film.
Yeah, well, we discussed that because there's like this kind of withdrawal happening from like online and streamers where you might buy a movie for $20 and you think it's yours, and all of a sudden it is gone off the platform. And here you spent $20 to own this movie that you can watch whenever you want, and now it's gone because they lost a license contract. They want to pay for it again. So now that $20 you spent is gone. You can't get it back. And luckily, people like Christopher Nolan are kind of pushing the physical format again, and you can't even buy certain like steel books of Oppenheimer that you just can't find them anymore. They're gone forever. So it's like I think the idea of the physical format is coming back because people still want to collect, even though they're used to like having it digitally all put together nicely. I think if you have a DVD or a Blu-ray, it's there forever, and you can watch it whenever you want. You don't have to worry about an internet connection going out. It's like I think that was going to start to resurface again, and that's what we're probably going to do in a few months is start to work on a Blu-ray DVD release.
Well, Matt Damon recently said that, when you make a film, like a big studio puts out a film, and
Yep.
he said, let's say it does halfway decent at the box office. Maybe it wasn't what they wanted, but he said you could always depend on the DVD sales to make
Yeah.
up the rest. And of course, from those sales, the residuals were much higher when it came to all of the actors.
Yep.
Now, he even noted that we don't have that anymore. So when it goes straight to streaming, you don't have any money to make once you place it there. So yes, the physical DVDs now are coming back. And yeah, people are ticked off. Man, I paid $20 to watch that film from here to eternity, and now I
Yep.
can't see it anymore. Now they go back and buy the DVD. And I'm sure the studios would love to see the physical DVD sales go back up into the billions of dollars, because even with the music industry, vinyl last year made over $1 billion.
Yeah. And luckily, like I know recently, like TikTok lost a lot of their big artists. So I think you're going to start to see a trend where like all this giving away music for free and movies has to come to an end. People need to be paid for what they're worth. And like, I remember when I was, growing up as a kid, going to the record store and buying a CD or a record, it was like a big deal. And now it's like people just go on Spotify and listen for free. And it's like you might pay a couple of dollars a month, but like the artist makes no money. And the same thing with like I said, the DVD sales, that's more money for the actors to make at a later date. That the more they sell, the more they make. So I feel like that has to come back. And I think what might really help is like if we start putting like more like these vintage stores back in place, like a Blockbuster or something. Just give people, oh, here we are again, we're renting movies, we can buy movies. It's like it becomes like an event.
Oh, well, yeah. I remember the event when you would walk into a Blockbuster and then you go to the new release, the
Yep.
film you've been waiting to see on a Friday night, and they're all checked out.
Oh yeah, no, I remember that quite a bit. And I remember like I would go there a certain time, and then like when people were returning things, I was like, what are you returning? And I'm like, I'll take it. I'll take it. That was like a good score. He could get what they just brought back right away. It goes right out. So that
Yeah,
was
but
always,
but then you had to put your name on a waiting list because you would tell the clerk, "Hey, call me when somebody brings this film back." And then they had a big running list from everybody in town.
oh yeah. But sometimes the clerks didn't care if they knew you. Okay, here, just take it. Just take this one and say this came back in, take it and go. And that was a good day. It was like it's actually like I love going to the theater and watching movies, but like back then, like going to the store, with your friends, whatever, picking out movies you're gonna watch. It was like it was a good way to bond and just get together, and it became an event. Nowadays, people just stream like an entire show and like a series in one day, and it's over. It's, all by themselves. I'm like, but like watching movies from a blockbuster together, it's like it was kind of kept people more together. I think.
It does. Now, will we see a possible sequel to Roswell Delirium? Because I noticed that on IMDb you have Space Rock possibly in a working script.
Yeah, well, I've been having some ideas of the last couple of months, and everybody has been asking that question. And I told everybody at a Q&A recently that there is a sort of sequel. It's not a complete sequel of Roswell, but it's kind of a spin-off of that world, and kind of like a world where basically there's less things where that could be controlled. There's not really food anymore. There's not power. It's kind of like the Walking Dead situation for all these survivors of alien and nuclear attacks. So there is something that I'm writing that's happening right now, but it'll be a couple years. So.
Well, Richard, I mean, this is a very cool film.
Thank you.
And ladies and gentlemen, Roswell Delirium. This results in a very rich, complex story. that evokes a new perspective on the 1980s by plumbing the emotional depths of a strong, heroic young woman driven by the dogged pursuit of the truth, even in the face of her own destruction. Now, during the 1980s, the U.S. is hit by a wave of nuclear attacks, and after the fallout, those who remain pretend like everything is normal, even when they're experiencing radiation poisoning. But a young girl named Mayday tries to make contact on a series of ham radios with her father, who is in space on a shuttle mission. Now, instead of making contact, she receives an intergalactic distress call from space that leads her on a journey to Space Rock, the land where Area 51 once was. As to what happens next, well, you'll have to watch the film to know that. And Richard, where can everybody see Roswell Delirium?
Currently, right now, we have a festival on the 24th of February, the TLC Chinese Theater 6, playing in Hollywood, California. And then we have a few more festivals, and I think the Phoenix Film Festival. And then after that, it might be going to Barcelona. And as we're kind of like getting the final run of the festivals, we are currently in negotiations of a few contracts for streaming. So we should have a home by end of May, June for somewhere people to watch the film.
Oh, well, great. Well, let us know when those dates are, and then that way we can tell all of our viewers and listeners, so that way they can be ready to see Roswell Delirium. And ladies and gentlemen, if you love sci-fi, this is the film. If you love Close Encounters with the Third Kind, this is that kind of film. Has that same kind of feel, but that 1980s vibe, man. You just can't beat it. And Richard, again, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this picture.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's been a great time. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. And ladies and gentlemen, you can catch all the replays of our interviews with the top film directors, producers, screenwriters, and actors, and more on our website at bondoncinema.com. We are also available on YouTube and a dozen audio platforms as well. So I want to thank you for watching and listening. And as for me, hey, I could say beam me up, Scotty, but that's not this kind of film. We may have to put on our tin hat for this one, but hey, I'll see you at the movies.